Ian Stark had not laughed in 6 years. Not once, not even by accident. He sat every night at a dining table built for 6 people and ate alone in a house that echoed with his own footsteps. The staff had learned to keep their voices low around him. His own sister had learned to knock twice before entering a room, just in case. Then one rainy afternoon, a 7-year-old girl he had never met walked straight up to him, looked him dead in the eye, and asked him a question nobody in 6 years had been brave enough to ask. What happened next would change everything. Ian was 42 years old, and by most measures, he had everything a person could want. 3 companies, a private jet, a mansion with more rooms than he could name. But none of it meant much, because it wasn't the 2 people he actually wanted. 6 years earlier, on a quiet stretch of highway, a truck had crossed the center line during a family trip home from vacation. Ian survived. His wife, Claire, did not. His 5-year-old daughter, Emma, did not. Sometimes the sound of the impact came back to him so clearly that he was terrified it was becoming more vivid in his memory than the sound of their laughter had ever been. After the funeral, something in him simply shut off. He kept working, because work didn't ask him how he felt. He had not cried in front of another person since the funeral. He had not laughed, not really, not once. His employees noticed it first. Meetings that used to end with easy conversation now ended in silence. His old friends stopped calling after the 3rd or 4th unanswered invitation. Only his younger sister, Celine, refused to give up on him. She tried therapists. She tried vacations. She once showed up unannounced with his favorite meal from childhood, hoping it might crack something open. Nothing worked, and every failed attempt left her a little more afraid that grief had taken her brother too, the same way it had taken his wife and daughter. Eventually, Celine began to realize that another appointment wasn't what her brother needed right now. He needed to remember what an ordinary, unguarded moment of happiness even felt like. So she called an old college friend, Mira Carter, a single mother whose warmth had always made the people around her feel comfortable simply being themselves. Celine told Mira a little about what Ian had lost, so that if the subject ever came up naturally during the visit, Mira would know how to handle it gently. Mira agreed to stay at the mansion for a few days with her daughter, Nora, who had just turned 7, and said whatever came into her head, with 0 filter and 0 fear. The moment Nora walked through the front door, she stopped and stared up at Ian the way children study something they don't yet understand. He was standing near the staircase in a dark suit, arms folded, his expression unreadable. Most adults looked away from that expression. Nora didn't. She tilted her head and asked him, right in front of everyone, if he was always this serious. The room went quiet. Celine froze mid-sentence. Mira opened her mouth to apologize. Ian just looked at the little girl, caught completely off guard by how simple and how direct the question was. Over the next hour, Nora wandered through the mansion, unimpressed by any of it. She peered into the private theater and shrugged. She stopped in front of a wall of expensive art and asked Mira why grown-ups paid money for paintings that didn't even look like anything. Then she found Ian again, sitting alone in his study, and asked the question that would follow him for the rest of that week. If he was so rich, why did his house feel so sad? Ian didn't answer right away. He just sat there, letting the question land. Because in 6 years nobody else had said out loud what everyone around him had clearly been thinking. Mira, mortified, tried to pull her daughter away. Ian told her, quietly, that it was fine. He meant it. What struck him wasn't that Nora had asked something bold. It was that a 7-year-old had noticed, in one afternoon, what grown adults had been too afraid to mention in 6 years. That evening, Ian found himself watching Mira and Nora from across the room. Mira reminded her daughter to eat her vegetables. Nora groaned dramatically. Mira fixed a piece of hair that had fallen in Nora's face, and they bickered over something trivial about bedtime. Then within seconds were laughing at each other, easily, like it cost them nothing. Ian sat very still, because it had been exactly like that once, at his own table, with his own daughter. He left the room before anyone noticed the change in his face. Mira noticed anyway. She found him standing by a window a few minutes later, jaw tight, eyes fixed on nothing. She didn't ask if he was okay, because she could see that he wasn't. Instead, she waited. Eventually, he admitted, quietly, that watching her with Nora reminded him of his wife fixing their daughter's hair the exact same way. On an ordinary Tuesday morning, he hadn't known, would become one of his last memories of her. Mira didn't offer a speech. She simply told him that he didn't have to stop loving them just because they were gone. Ian said nothing back, but something in his chest loosened, just slightly, for the first time in 6 years. That night, everyone gathered in the living room before dinner. Mira stood up to get something from the kitchen and, still talking over her shoulder, caught her foot on the edge of a rug. For 1 second, the room held its breath. She stumbled, arms flailing, and caught herself on the back of a chair, more startled than hurt. Nora looked at her mother's wide-eyed face. Mira looked back at her daughter's identical expression, and then Nora burst out laughing, that unguarded, uncontrollable laugh that only children have. Mira tried to stay composed, and failed within 2 seconds, laughing so hard she had to sit down. Celine covered her mouth, trying not to join in. And then it happened. Ian laughed. A real one, low and rough, like it had been locked away so long it had forgotten how to come out smoothly. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The room had gone completely silent, because everyone had heard it at once, and everyone turned to look at him, stunned. Ian stopped almost as fast as he'd started, glancing around at the faces staring back at him, half embarrassed, half in disbelief at himself. Celine's eyes filled with tears. She hadn't heard her brother laugh like that, not once, since before the accident. The silence that followed was almost louder than the laugh itself. Before we get deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Later that night, once Celine had gone up to bed and Nora had fallen asleep on the couch, Ian sat with Mira in the quiet kitchen. He told her something he had never said out loud to anyone, not Celine, not any therapist. He said he had stopped laughing on purpose. Every time he felt something close to happiness, guilt followed right behind it, because his wife and daughter would never get to feel happiness again, and it seemed unfair that he still could. Somewhere along the way, he had convinced himself that staying miserable was a form of loyalty to them. Mira listened without interrupting. Then, in a quiet, unhurried voice, she told him that happiness had never been a betrayal, and that grief was never meant to become a prison someone lived inside forever. Ian sat with that for a long moment. He had spent 6 years treating his own joy as something dangerous. Hearing it said plainly, by someone with nothing to gain from comforting him, hit differently than any advice he'd received before. He didn't say he was healed. He didn't promise anything would change overnight. But for the first time, he let himself consider that loving Claire and Emma and living a full life were not opposites after all. The next morning, Mira packed up their things to head home. Nora ran ahead to say goodbye and stopped in front of Ian, studying him one more time with that same serious little face from the day before. She asked him if he was going to be grumpy again tomorrow. Ian almost smiled and admitted that he probably would be, at least a little. Nora shook her head firmly and told him he was better when he laughed. Before he could respond, she pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket and pushed it into his hands. It was a crayon drawing of 3 people standing together, Ian, Mira, and Nora, and above them, 2 small stars colored in yellow. Celine had mentioned Claire and Emma to Mira before the visit, and Mira had gently explained it to Nora so she wouldn't say something hurtful by accident, so Nora knew exactly who those stars were meant to be. Ian understood immediately too. His smile faded, and for the first time since the funeral, he let someone see him cry. Later that same morning, once Mira and Nora had driven off, Ian walked into his office, smiling faintly but unmistakably. His employees noticed instantly. A few exchanged confused glances in the hallway. His assistant leaned toward a colleague and quietly asked if something was wrong with him. Ian overheard it and laughed out loud, right there in the office. Nothing was wrong with him. For the first time in a very long time, something was finally right. From that day on, Nora's drawing stayed on his desk. Not because he had forgotten his wife and daughter, but because he had finally understood something. Honoring the people you've lost doesn't mean refusing to keep living. It means carrying their love forward into whatever life you have left. Sometimes the person who helps you find your way back isn't someone who knew you before the pain. Sometimes it's someone who never knew you were supposed to be broken in the first place and simply treated you like you weren't. If you were Ian, would you have allowed yourself to be happy again? Tell us below. We read every comment. And if this story moved you even a little, subscribe, because there's another story just like this one waiting for you next.